Hi, everyone. Welcome back to your BC headlines. I'm Vineet Brach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here's what we are following today. Well, the possibility of more tariffs on Canada looms large this afternoon. U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to have a big reveal on what he's calling reciprocal tariffs. Not a whole lot of details so far on what these will be, who they will be for, but we did speak to businesses in Abbotsford today about the possible impact. The city is deemed to be the most vulnerable in BC to tariffs, according to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. One aircraft manufacturer says the tariffs could decimate business.
It will decimate us. It will probably, we will probably lose 50% or 60% of business right away on it. So as a business, when President Trump started talking about the tariffs, we had to take proactive measures. We do own one company in Montana. So that company might take on some more work that we normally do. We're also franchising our business throughout the U.S.
He says 80% of his business is in the States, and Trump is expected to make his announcement in about an hour. So we've heard how businesses are feeling a bit jittery ahead of the latest announcement, but Trump has said that the goals of these tariffs is to raise revenue and to increase production in the United States. But one assistant professor of economics told the Early Edition this morning it's nearly impossible to achieve both of those goals through tariffs alone.
What seems most likely in the short run is that prices will simply go up. Perhaps in the long run, you'll see some more American production, but in the short run, this looks to me like if they were to put 20% tariffs across the board, which seems to be the likely betting outcome right now, this would have significant price effects for U.S. consumers.
When it comes to how Canada will do, Jacquard says one advantage is this country is that we aren't being targeted alone and can coordinate with other regions like the European Union and Mexico. And Prime Minister Mark Carney is back in Ottawa to plan Canada's response. Also, a massive landslide has closed West Side Road just north of Lake Okanagan Resort. Fire officials say 2 slides came down about 10 o'clock last night, with one slide described as being about 90 meters wide and nearly 2 meters deep. There are no reports of injuries or damage to structures, but officials are asking people to avoid the area. And people must use Highway 97 to get around the closure. An update is expected coming up this afternoon. Also, a piece of Canadian military history has been dug up in Vancouver's Hastings Park. PNE officials say crews working on the new Freedom Mobile Arch last Thursday uncovered an artillery piece from under the main stage of the former amphitheater. The curator for the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada Museum says this is a German gun that was captured during the First World War and then brought back to Vancouver to be displayed as a war trophy.
In the time in between the First and Second World War, they no longer wanted to have these in public parks. They were starting to rust, and it was a depression, and they weren't sure who was going to maintain them. So they collected them all at Hastings Park. Eventually, they had intended to have a big display of them, but eventually they cut them up for scrap for the Second World War, and most of them were turned into Liberty ships during the Second World War.
And he also says there could be more artifacts like it underneath the park. Okay, and you are updated this afternoon. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Vineet Brach. Stay with us. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, Canada is bracing itself. In 1 hour, Donald Trump will outline what exactly a new round of tariffs will look like. Well, tariffs and uncertainty have gripped headlines since Trump began his second term. Well, from your job to your finances to your personal relationships with Americans, are you dealing with uncertainty and anxiety? And how are you managing? We'll talk about that up first. After 12:30, tariffs coming for the auto industry too. So we'll hear about the impact on prices and consumers. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. We are a little less than an hour away from U.S. President Donald Trump taking to the Rose Garden at the White House, where he will lay out his global tariff policy that imposes what he calls reciprocal tariffs on imports into the United States. Now, that's on top of what's already been announced, like sweeping 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods and 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. Trump is calling it Liberation Day for the United States, while the countries they could impact, including Canada, are bracing for what will likely be yet another shakeup. And the details of the plan have yet to be unveiled in an hour from now, but CBC correspondent Katie Nicholson is in Washington, and here she is working out what we know so far.
At 25%, that you'll remember the U.S. agreed to suspend it was basically on CUSMA compliant businesses until April 2nd. Well, guess what? April 2nd today. So the question is what happens? Ottawa-based international trade lawyer William Pellerin said that exemption, which really had been giving Canadian businesses a bit of a lifeline in the midst of all of this chaos, unless it is renewed today, this afternoon, those tariffs are likely going to come into effect. Here is William Pellerin.
Proving that CUSMA origination was a very, very big deal and allowed companies over the last few weeks to save vast amounts of tariffs and continue to ship to the United States duty-free. It is that exemption that is now lifted that is going to cause a lot of harm in the coming days unless it's renewed, and we'll learn more about that from the Rose Garden this afternoon.
Okay, so supposing those tariffs come into full effect, then you've got the auto tariffs, you've got steel and aluminum tariffs, energy tariffs, and whatever is announced today in the Rose Garden at 4 o'clock. So Canada has to figure out how will all of that accumulate? Do they stack on top of each other? And how does that hit the Canadian economy? There's very big questions today from Mark Carney in his role as Prime Minister as he and the team adjust their response. Now, yesterday, the White House confirmed whatever it is that's announced today at 4 p.m., those tariffs are supposed to be effective immediately. And that is a tall order because we don't know how these tariffs are going to be structured. Are they going to be tiered, tailored to specific countries, or might we see some sort of flat rate? So just consider this for a second, okay? So the U.S. imports about $3.2 trillion of goods every year. $3.2 trillion. So just think about the logistics of trying to implement something like that so quickly on so many products. Business leaders are complaining about a lack of clarity. They're going to lawmakers asking how they can get a carve out. And just expect that the market today is going to react very swiftly. And then you're going to hear from the heads of other nations.
That's CBC reporter Katie Nicholson. We're asking you, how are you dealing with tariff uncertainty and anxiety? How are you processing what it seems like daily tariff developments? We'd like to hear from you. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well, or you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Kareem Allam, political strategist with Richardson Strategy, and he's been good enough to come into studio. Hello.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I think I'm a little nervous about the economy. I've got some anxiety myself about it. I'm feeling the pinch just in terms of my work, and I hear that from a lot of my friends as well, too.
Yeah. Now, okay, so in practical terms, how do you feel the pinch in your work?
Well, what drives work, the people who need public relations or public policy advice are people that are developing projects, that are making investments in the province. And right now, it doesn't look like a great idea to be deploying a ton of capital or a ton of investment in this uncertain economic climate. So that's certainly slowing down what we're experiencing in the public relations and public affairs world. But I'm hearing it from my friends that work in the restaurant sector, in the manufacturing sector, as well as in the housing sector as well, too.
Okay, let's take a call here from Daryl at Kitkwanga. Hi, Daryl. What are your thoughts on the tariff uncertainty and how are you managing it?
Well, I wanted to talk about the reason why Trump put the tariffs on Canada in the first place. And he, this morning on his Truth Social, blamed Canada again for the fentanyl emergency and saying that Canada is shipping tons of fentanyl into the United States. But I did some research on our local health authorities' toxic drug alerts, and I listed 4 chemicals, fentanyl, xylazine, isotonitazine, bromazolam, and the last one, bromazolam. There's only one place in the world that it's produced, and that's the United States. I searched all of Mexico, I searched all of China and Canada for bromazolam, and it's not produced anywhere in the world except Ann Arbor, Michigan in USA. The company is called Cayman Chemical Company.
And that's what we've heard, right, Daryl, is that although Donald Trump has been raising this issue about opioids and illegal drugs going south, there's which stats show that it's a minuscule proportion and percentage that comes from Canada. There is the issue of what comes into Canada as well. Daryl, thank you very much for calling from Kitwanga, looking into the numbers in Northern Health. And that, in fact, is actually what's behind a move from the Democrats right now. They're trying to hold a vote in the Senate to try and undo Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods. And this comes from Tim Kaine, and his point is the emergency that Donald Trump has been referring to, has declared as a result of fentanyl coming into the States. He says from Canada, they're saying that's not legitimate. And so they held a press conference this morning about the vote that they're trying to hold.
Tariffs is a tax, and it will be passed on to consumers. According to the New York Times, 6.5 million jobs would be impacted by the Canadian tariffs, and people in red states will be especially impacted, from farmers to small businesses. And here's another problem. It's chaotic.
This is not about fentanyl. It's about tariffs. It's about a national sales tax on American families. Trump's economic advisor, Peter Navarro, said that the total of these tariffs will be $6 trillion of taxes paid by American consumers, more than $600 billion a year.
Just in Vermont, to make it very concrete, we get a lot of our electricity from Canada. We get a lot of our gasoline on the northern part of Vermont from Canada. We get our home heating fuel from Canada. And those bills for folks are going to go up immediately. Canada's our friend. It's not China. And along the border, where we have decades and decades of mutual respect, we're starting to change that into distrust.
Those were Senators Peter Welch, Tim Kaine, and Chuck Schumer. They're trying to get more Republicans on board with that vote, too. Kareem, what do you make of this move from Democratic senators?
They're trying to signal how unhappy they are with the tariffs that are being imposed. And to Chuck Schumer's point, or to Senator Schumer's point, it will make life more expensive for Americans. In fact, one of the things that is an interesting dynamic just around this vote in the U.S. Senate is the Democrats actually don't have the majority, the Republicans do. If all 47 Democrats hold, 3 Republicans have announced that they're actually going to support the Democrats. So that means only one other.
They need one more.
They need one more. And then that would effectively stop it in the Senate. The question is, can the Democrats actually rally enough support in the other house, in the House of Representatives, to get this across the line and stop Trump from this fake accusation that the previous caller, Daryl, just pointed out, that fentanyl's coming from Canada. It's not. It's just simply not true.
But can these be more than symbolic, though?
It will be symbolic in as far as whether the House of Representatives in the United States can pass it. But I think that a lot of Americans are feeling the pinch. I don't think a lot of Americans initially understood how much of their supply chain relied on Canada. Here in Vancouver, for example, Boeing has been making about $100 million a year in investments in Richmond-based companies to support their parts distribution for their planes. It's a significant investment. I don't think a lot of people in Washington State know how reliant Boeing is on Richmond, let alone the aluminum that goes into those airplanes all comes from Kitimat. So I think as time has gone by, Canada has been very effective in raising the profile of the impact of what's being proposed, and the panic among U.S. leadership, particularly in the Democratic Party, and now we're starting to see it in the Republican Party, is really ramping up.
Let's take another call here. Speaking of Americans and how they're feeling, Keith was just in the States on the weekend. Keith is calling us from Vancouver. Hello.
Hi there. How are you?
I am fine. So what did you observe while you were in the States? Where did you go, first of all?
Yeah, great question. I had a friend visiting from Halifax, and I said, we could go down and see a friend in the States if you had your passport. And he said, I've got my passport. So we hopped in the car, a 50-minute wait, which is a bit longer than expected, but with a lot of lanes open. So it's a little busier than expected. But I went down. I've got friends just in Bellingham there, and I was kind of thinking they probably need a hug just as much as many of us do in here. A lot of people did vote for the orange Muppet, but a lot of people didn't, of course. And it's there's a lot of fear. It's starting to trickle in. I've got a distant American relative in Vermont, and I chatted to her. She's a bit older, and stereotypically, Vermont, she is Democrat, I guess. So she just said there's a lot of fear there. So it's really changing things. And my friend's wife noted that even at Costco, I thought she was talking about Trader Joe's, the infamous Trader Joe's, but she wandered around the parking lot at Costco. And the reason the massive Costco was built in Bellingham and the massive dairy section is because of Canada. Bellingham doesn't have the population base. So I remember years ago they were complaining about all the Canadians buying gas. It's like we should have only, Washington State or Bellingham residents only for a period of time. That doesn't work because the reason that is built is because of Canada. And she wandered around the parking lot, and there was very, very few Canadian license plates or BC license plates, which did kind of surprise me. She said they're few and far between. So, yeah, your American friends, if you've got them, it's other side of the border. They're not that far away. Go down, give them a hug, take off, and back home you go. So,
Keith, thank you so much for sharing that your observation and your experience there.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Good to hear from you. How are people navigating? There's, buy Canadian, don't travel to the United States. How are people processing this, I guess, in that way?
I was just actually talking to the former head of the Bellingham Chamber of Commerce, and she told me that when Vancouver and British Columbia's economy is on fire, Bellingham does really, really, really well. And when it's the opposite, they're going to struggle down there for sure. Blaine, Bellingham, those areas in Washington are really going to struggle as a result of this trade dispute. And so as much as we feel anger towards some of our U.S. friends, there's a lot of them that are going to feel the pain along with us. And we've actually got a lot of allies there too. So sometimes it's important for us to try not to forget that.
Yeah. Do you have any, you're a political strategist, and so you deal with politicians trying to navigate very, let's say, touchy, diplomatic situations. Like how do you think politicians are kind of managing that too? I remember hearing from Justin Trudeau saying, Americans, we're not mad at you. It's what Donald Trump is doing. So how are politicians kind of making those decisions?
I think there's been a good response generally from Canada and some of our leaders. I've been really impressed with Premier Canoe and Premier Eby and Premier Ford. They've sort of taken this Captain Canada mantle, and they've been stern, they've been firm without being disrespectful. I believe that one of the Kentucky representatives in the U.S. called up Doug Ford. Ontario is one of the biggest liquor producers or purchasers in the world, and was begging Premier Ford to not take Kentucky bourbon off of Ontario liquor shelves. And the Premier just said, no, you guys are hurting us. And this is how we want to send a message back. So I think there's a firmness, but respectfulness in the tone that's required in this moment.
It's interesting to see the way they've flooded media it down south as well, right?
Well, there's been a tremendous amount of media buying. The Canadian government spent millions of dollars advertising in Republican-heavy states, trying to inform people how much this is going to cost them, how much this is going to impact them. And you are seeing it work. Like we've seen so far, 3 Republican senators break ranks with their own party. We just need one more.
The Democrats do.
Yes, the Democrats do. And Canada, too.
There you go. Let's take some more calls here. Kareem Allam is my guest, political strategist with Richardson Strategy. And ahead of this announcement from U.S. President Donald Trump on the next round of tariffs, saying they're retaliatory tariffs with trading partners with the United States, and calling this Liberation Day for Americans. How are you managing the tariff uncertainty? And are you dealing with anxiety around it? How are you approaching your personal finance decisions, your own relationships with Americans? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also just hit pound 690 on your phone, or you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. I'll take a look at your emails in just a moment. We have about 5 or 6 coming in right now. First, let's go to Emmanuel in Nanaimo. Hi, Emmanuel. Welcome.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Hello.
So, how are you? How are you feeling about all of this?
Well, I mean, at this point, I mean, it's going to be a rough ride for Canada. I think there's no way Canada is going to win this against with the United States. I think it's a signal as well that while globalization is over, I think countries now need to really rely on their own chain supply. They need to manufacture their own product. We need to be in control of what we produce. And also, I think it's also a time for Canadians to really look at where our allegiance is at this point in the world. Are we part of the free world, and do we swear allegiance with America and leaders of the free world, or are we with the communist China? And right now, it's a big problem in Canada, a huge problem. I encourage everyone to look into the work that Sam Cooper, investigative journalist here in Canada, has done on
foreign interference
and foreign interference, but also infiltration by the Chinese Communist Party, and to all level of government in Canada, the fentanyl crisis. There's another fellow named Scott McGregor, intelligence officer. He's worked with the military.
Emmanuel, I take your point.
Talk about how corrupt we are in Canada.
Yeah. So, Emmanuel, thank you very much. So it's, there is this kind of reordering of the global order. So who do you turn to as your allies? At one point, China was certainly not on friendly terms. I mean, you just think of the two Michaels. And so what does this mean then for who Canada's allies are going to be?
There needs to be a realignment in the relationships we have as a country. We've been very heavily reliant on our relationship with the U.S. We're going to need to diversify those relationships. We might need to look at a free trade agreement with the UK and France and Australia and other countries with similar values to Canadian values. I thought it was really interesting when Prime Minister Carney was sworn in. The first trip he made wasn't down south, as is typically the protocol. He went to UK and France. So I think a lot of thinking at the most senior levels of the Canadian government a lot of thinking is being directed towards what those new relationships look like, what that new realignment ends up being. Some of it might be non-traditional partners, but I think the first step is to look at historically where we came from. And the first 3 meetings this Prime Minister has had were with France, UK, and Indigenous leaders, the 3 founding groups of our country. So I think we're looking a little bit at our past to try to determine what our future looks like.
Thank you so much for that call. Our last caller on this is Ajit in Penticton. Welcome back to the show, Ajit.
Hi, Michelle. How's it going?
I am well. And so how are you managing the uncertainty that all the tariff news is bringing?
Well, I'm honestly pretty chill about it. And that's because one of the aspects of my life that I like to kind of be a motif or motto, I guess, is the fact that if you want to think globally, you got to act locally. And as a result, I'm helping on one of the campaigns for the local NDP candidate, Harpreet Badal. And the reason I'm feeling pretty calm about things is we just navigated through the pandemic, which was one of the most historic moments, I would say, in all of our lives. And now we're just reaping the seeds of what we sowed in terms of the economic impact and, of course, the outcome of the American general election. However, I was down in New Orleans for the Super Bowl. I didn't make it into the Super Bowl, but I was around the New Orleans area, and there was a uniting of Americans, excuse me here, just got to clear my throat, and Canadians who were there for not just a game, but also uniting against Donald Trump. There was a lot of anti-Trump rhetoric, even down in Louisiana, the South. And there was a gathering of American culture, if we want to call that, for what the Super Bowl was. So I'm not too worried about the potential future. I'm worried about our institutions and structures of power currently and the rise of a dictatorship in the South. However, because I'm making the small change in my own community by volunteering on Harpreet's campaign in Okanagan Lake, West Kootenay, I feel like I am part of the solution. So
Okay.
I can't control it all, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, work with what is in your own domain. Ajit, thank you very much for the call. I have 30 seconds, Kareem, but we're in an election. There's uncertainty there. What will be the impact?
The most important thing that we need to do after this election is all unite as Canadians. All we have is each other in this fight. This is going to require us to band together in a way that we haven't had to in a long time. And I feel that energy is there. And I feel that we're going to need to rely on each and every one of us to reach into our own networks to help us get out of this. And I'm feeling really confident. So I have a little bit of Ajit confidence as well, too.
There you go. Nice to hear. Well, nice to speak to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Kareem Allam, political strategist with Richardson Strategy. And John is calling us now in Seattle. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. How are you?
I am well. We heard someone say earlier that Americans need a hug as well. How are you feeling?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty throughout the United States, especially with the pending announcement that he's going to make. And I would just like to say, I'm sorry. I did not vote for the Orange Idiot. And our thoughts are with you.
Is it? Am I hearing you sound a little bit emotional there, John?
Yeah, he's tearing apart the nation.
What are your conversations like with fellow Americans there?
Well, we're watching our nation being dismantled. And being a native, it's just he's tearing apart our rights. The Department of Education is going away. I don't know where he thinks that we're going to get scientists, even though he doesn't believe in them. It's a sad state of affairs.
John, I really appreciate hearing from you and you're sharing your thoughts there. Thanks so much for listening and for calling in, okay?
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Take care. That's John in Seattle. And you can always let us know what you think on this too. It's bctoday@cbc.ca. Again, there will be special coverage of the announcement from Donald Trump from the Rose Garden at the White House. That's coming up in just about half an hour from now. It's 12:30 now. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And there will be special coverage in half an hour on the announcement of the next round of tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump says he will announce coming up at 1 o'clock at the White House. Lots of coverage on that coming up at 1 and later on throughout the day here on CBC. And in the next half hour here on the show, we'll talk about auto tariffs as well, as that they are set to begin tomorrow. And people in the auto industry, they're bracing for the impacts, but also for what it will mean for those sticker prices. So what will it mean for you as a consumer? We'll talk about that with AutoTrader coming up just after the CBC News Update. And here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A mudslide has cut off access along the west side of Okanagan Lake. A photo posted by the Transportation Ministry's contractor shows separate mud flows merging over West Side Road. The Drive BC notice says the route is closed at Denison Road, about 13 kilometers east of West Kelowna, with no estimated time for reopening. The City of Vancouver says advance voting for a two-seat by-election has broken records. Nearly 7,700 votes were cast over 2 days at advance polls. Another 6,400 mail-in ballots were requested. And Vancouver's real estate board says home sales were down more than 13% from last year and almost 37% below the 10-year seasonal average. Local broker Randy Riles says buyers are wary of making big purchases over uncertainty from the trade war with the U.S. The composite benchmark price for a home was $1.19 million, down 0.6% from last year. And now the BC forecast on the north coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 10. Highs around 5 with some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly sunny with a high of 9. Highs up to 10 degrees with showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a high of 12 with a mix of sun and cloud. And periods of rain this afternoon in the Fraser Valley, clearing here in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria with highs around 11. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thanks so much, Rob. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. And welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott, and CBC will be very busy today. Their afternoon shows as well. They'll be covering what's coming out of Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcement at the Rose Garden just after 1 o'clock today. For our Metro Vancouver audience, Gloria Makarenko is host of On the Coast, and here she is with more.
Hi there, Michelle. It's Gloria Makarenko here, and I hope you can join us this afternoon for On the Coast. By the time we're on air, we will have more details of Donald Trump's tariffs that are coming into effect immediately. So we'll have more coverage on that on our show this afternoon. Also, U.S. cuts to HIV and AIDS programs around the world could lead to a wave of new infections and deaths. We're going to get a local perspective on this from a top HIV doctor and researcher from the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV and AIDS. Dr. Julio Montaner is going to be our guest. And we're also going to hear from BC's Police Complaint Commissioner about their new online database for complaints against police. So join us between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
Gloria, thank you very much. And yes, you can hear Gloria at 3 o'clock on the Coast in Metro Vancouver. And of course, all our afternoon shows around the province as well on the tariff story. And Joanne wrote us an email. Canadians have been suffering from anxiety and pressure of the rising cost of living for 2 years. And politicians have been challenged to reduce the cost of living, address our problems with health, education, and the growing homeless population. All of these initiatives are taking a lower priority in Canada while people are reaching their breaking point. Joanne, thank you very much. BC Today at cbc.ca. Going to the guest. $12.34 now Pacific time. Okay, so if you're keeping track, there are also 25% tariffs on the auto industry kicking in tomorrow. Now that could greatly affect the sticker price you see on vehicles. Those in the industry say tariffs are influencing car buyers' decisions. So what about you? Have you rushed to buy a vehicle ahead of the tariffs date? Are you holding off on purchasing a vehicle or looking into buying used instead of new? I want to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Or you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Baris Akyurek, VP of Insights and Intelligence at AutoTrader, which is an online marketplace for new and used vehicles. Baris, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. You're joining us from Toronto and, of course, Ontario. will be very affected when it comes to jobs in the auto industry. Tell us more about how severe that would be.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ontario, I think overall the impact's going to be in Canada, all cars that are available out there. We'll see, first of all, if it's going to go through. We've had this experience a couple of times in the last couple of months, so we'll see if they're going to go through. But if they did, probably there's going to be an impact both on the new and used vehicle sites.
You said if they're going to go through, do you still think that there's a chance they won't?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's what happened in the couple of times in the last couple of months. So I don't think anyone's 100% certain at this point. We'll be glued onto our TVs and radios and see what Trump has to say in an hour or so.
Yeah. And what about BC? Less affected, but what would be the impact on British Columbia?
I think overall, so again, I don't want to talk about province by province, if you don't mind, but overall, what we expect to see is that there's going to be an impact on car demand and car prices. And if you think about it, if you apply tariffs on any product, cars included, obviously, prices will get impacted. They will be going up. So if prices go up, what happens to demand? Demand's going to come down. So back in COVID, I know that we don't want to think about COVID, but we had a similar situation in the automotive market when COVID first hit. And at the time, the dynamics were a little different, that we didn't have enough new vehicles on the lots.
Right.
And what we saw was that the demand shifted from new to used, because used cars were available. And as such, what we saw was that the used car prices skyrocketed. And to be more specific, in 2021, used car prices went up by 21.7%.
Wow.
So we expect to see a similar dynamic if they go through. And in fact, looking at our data, sales data, engagement on the site, traffic on the site, the activity has already started since the beginning of March. So some consumers have already started shifting their attention to used vehicles, and therefore used car sales and used car activity has been pretty substantially increased in the last 5 weeks. And if they go through, we expect to see these dynamics to continue.
You're looking at the possibility of prices increasing in the used market by 1/5.
So I don't know if it's going to be exactly 20% increase. That was a different time, but there's going to be definitely an increase. And in fact, again, just adding on in addition to what I said, because of this increased used car sales activity in March, prices already ticked up slightly. So what happens usually is that when you look at used car prices, they tend to start on the higher side in the beginning of the year, and they come down throughout the year. And in March last month, we saw a 0.3% uptick, which is against the general trends that we observed in normal years. So it's already started, and if they go through, probably this is going to continue as well.
Wow. And so I don't imagine you would advise people from your end to not buy a car, but I would imagine there are people saying, I'm going to hold off on any big purchase right now.
I'm sure there are, right? And also it depends on your financial situation, right? If you're in the market looking for a car, and I genuinely suggest that you pull the trigger, because, as we've just talked about, the impact on the market might be substantial. So if you have the means, if you need a car, definitely buy it. But on the other hand, as you suggested, probably there's going to be some consumers who would be delaying their purchases. And we'll keep researching, we'll keep analyzing, and we'll keep informing Canadians as to what's going on.
My guest is Baris Akyurek, VP of Insights and Intelligence at AutoTrader, and saying there has been a slight uptick already in used car purchases in the last month as people anticipate these tariffs coming in on auto products coming into the United States, 25% on imported cars, light trucks, SUVs, cargo vans. So asking you, what impact is that having on you? What are the decisions you're making around any purchases like a car? Have you rushed to purchase one? Are you turning to the used market? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to ask a question as well about how to navigate these times, you can call us, 1-800-825-5950. And our email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And so I should ask you, Baris, how can consumers then sort of figure out how to move forward? How can they navigate these kind of confusing times?
I think understanding what's going on is key, right? Obviously, with this Trump administration, things have been pretty volatile, right? So as you and I, in the beginning of the call, we talked about whether these tariffs will go through or not. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. So I think following the market closely is important. Do your research. If you have a make and model in your mind, if you are, want to buy a specific car, know the prices, follow the prices, and when the right time comes, if you have the means financially, buy it. Because if you don't, if you come back to it in the next couple of months, they might get a bit more expensive, assuming that these tariffs will be there.
And can you explain how they are supposed to work in the first place? Because of how integrated the U.S. and Canada are, so we know that it will affect vehicles themselves, but also key auto parts like engines and transmissions. But given how much movement there is back and forth, how is that even calculated then?
Yeah, I'm not a supply chain expert,
Sure.
I can't tell you in detail as to how these things work. But what we know is that the market is very well integrated between Canada, Mexico, and United States. So if these tariffs go through, regardless of what percentage they will be, there's definitely going to be an impact.
And what about cars built outside North America, German or Japanese cars?
Yeah, so good question. So how we think about it is that, yes, so if these cars are coming from anywhere outside the United States, they will not be impacted by tariffs. But that said, there's going to be, obviously, there's certain portion of the cars sold in Canada are produced in the United States, and they will see an increase in prices. So our expectation is that if this happens, the demand is going to shift from these cars that are tariff impacted to cars that are not impacted. Therefore, it might create a supply-demand mismatch within the new car segment, and therefore their prices might also go up.
Okay, so there's sort of a domino effect.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Let's put out our numbers again. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And we have an email here on cars, and this is a good question that we have. And let me just find the email here. And Joanne writes, recently my engine light came on. Turns out it was my ignition. So that resulted in a $400 bill. The car is over 20 years old. I'm in the market for a new one. But I won't be buying a new car, looking at 2020 to 2022. And so I noticed a couple of dealership sites that have certified pre-owned. What does this mean? So Joanne is asking, if I buy an older vehicle, will these be subject to tariffs? And her other question is there any consumer protection for buying an older vehicle?
So the first question is, if I buy a used vehicle, are they going to be exempt from tariffs? Yes, the car is already manufactured. It's already, assuming that it's a Canadian car, I don't see any changes in prices just because of tariffs. But going back to what we just talked about, probably because of the changes in supply and demand between new and used car prices, as we've talked about, they will increase. So they will be indirectly impacted. So that's question number one. And question number two was around consumer protection on used car
Yes,
sales.
purchases.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it all depends on how and where you buy your vehicle from. And I think there's a point about the certified pre-owned. I believe it depends on the manufacturer and dealership, but I think they all come with different warranties. So if that's the route, I'm sure she would be covered. But again, the details is obviously depends on the make, model, and the dealership that they're dealing with.
Okay, thank you for that. And it's interesting how consumer behavior shifts, right? Even in anticipation of these tariffs, as you say, people were thinking about it in March already. Now, Rob wrote us an email. Any brand new cars that are already on the lot of a dealership should not be affected by tariffs. I would think they would only affect vehicles that are not yet built or imported to Canada, so people don't have to shift to buying used cars just yet. Yeah, what is that? Does that make sense to you, Baris?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So what we, based on the inventory that we have on AutoTrader.ca and based on the sales rate in the last 45 days, we have 71 days worth of supply. Meaning that if all cars, if there's no more new cars coming to the market, based on the current sales rate, it would take 71 days to sell all new cars available. So there's some buffer for sure. But again, if you look at this this day supply metric by make, this story is very different. Certain brands have day supply over 100 days, 120 days, and certain brands have less than 30 days supply. So I think it all depends on the car that you're interested in. If you are looking for a car that's high on demand, maybe the pricing will be more acute and more prompt. But if you're looking for something that's available, there's a lot of availability, that might be a different story.
Okay. Now, what about electric vehicles? There's been controversy around it because of Tesla and all the protests that it's drawing. But what do you see for that portion of the market?
I hope we have 2 hours to talk about.
Yeah, that's quite the sigh there.
I
Yeah.
have lots to say. So obviously EVs they have gotten a lot of attention in the last while. We have all these mandates that we need to hit by 2026, 2030, 2035. So on the other hand, so obviously, given what we do, we try to understand the market as much as possible. We do a lot of research and analysis. And one of the key research pieces that we do is on EVs. So what we do is every year, in around the same time, we go reach out to our consumers and ask them a bunch of questions about EVs. Would they buy one? If they did, what kind of an EV? If they didn't, why not? Like, it's a very comprehensive analysis. So when we look at one of the key questions that we ask consumers is that in this research is that whether they would consider buying an EV as their next purchase. So we ran this survey first in 2022. And the percentage was 68. It was 68%. The following year came down to 56%. The following year it came down to 46%. And the 2025 version is being finalized. So I can't give you the exact numbers, but there's a decline. So if you look at the demand for electric vehicles, they've been coming down. On the supply side, as we've talked about these mandates, more EVs are being manufactured, so there's more and more supply in the market. So when you think about it, when you put one to one together, right? Economics 101, supply is high, demand is lower. What happens to prices? Prices are actually declining at a much faster pace than the overall market. So both new and used EV prices have come down by quite a bit. So that's the high level, that's the current situation. But in addition to that, to make things more convoluted, obviously we had the federal incentive program, and it was suspended back in January 13th. So going back to our research, we know that consumers do care about these incentives, which makes sense, right? They're motivated by these incentives. So all of a sudden, if you take the incentives out of the equation, guess what we think is going to happen to the EV market. So we believe EV market in 2025, assuming that there are no substantial changes in these provincial and federal programs, we believe that it's going to be a difficult year. And in fact, just to give one more specific example, data point, Germany did a similar thing back in December of 2023. So they suspended their incentive program. And the following year, between January and August, on a year-over-year basis, sales came down by 68.8%.
Wow.
So, yeah, so different economies, different markets. So I'm not suggesting that we would see a 70% decline, but we are expecting to see a decline nevertheless.
And in BC, in fact, the rebates are also under review now, as the province has just removed the consumer carbon tax. So they're looking to offset the cost of losing that revenue. And so that is up in the air right now as well. We have a call from Joseph in Nanaimo on tariffs. Hi, Joseph.
Hi.
Yeah, what's your question?
My question is if we can get the tariffs off from China vehicles and get the Chinese electric vehicles here. We don't need the rebates, and they're going to be cheaper to buy them.
Yeah, these are the Canadian tariffs that were implemented just recently to match U.S. tariffs on China. And there's been a lot of questions around that now that things are shifting when it comes to global alliances. This is more of a policy question, Baris, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
In terms of obviously final price cost for a vehicle, they tend to be cheaper on the cheaper side. But on the other hand, when it comes to their standards, labor standards, and the way that how they do their thing, again, I'm not really an expert in Chinese manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, but they're very different. They work on very different standards. So I think the conversation is much bigger than just looking at the price itself. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that at this point.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Thank you so much for that. It's an ongoing question, Joseph, so thanks for that. Jay in Fort St. John. Hi, Jay.
Yeah, hi. How are you today?
I am well. What's your question on autos and tariffs?
Yeah, my wife is a physician up here in Fort St. John, and she's looking at a vehicle that is manufactured in Alabama by Mercedes. And it would have to be obviously brought up to Canada for sale and retail. And then the question becomes, would there be impacts regarding, for example, luxury tax, or would there be other impacts? I thought I heard Baris talking about how Germany faced a situation before. I didn't quite catch it because I was calling in at the time.
Right.
And how perhaps the manufacturers would change their incentives. So it's probably a little bit of a derivative of what you've already covered, but perhaps there might be some knock-on effect regarding luxury tax and these types of things, because the community here really needs my wife.
Well, I was going to say, and did you move there so your wife could work as a doctor in Fort St. John?
Yes, we specifically located this position because of her specialty in MRI imaging.
Wow. And where did you move from?
New Jersey, USA. And in fact, we bought a German vehicle there and drove it all the way to Fort St. John.
When was this, Jay?
2018.
2018. Listen, you're right. Doctors are needed. So that's. I'm sure she is welcomed as a doctor there in the Northeast. Thank you so much for calling. I'll put your question. I know it's a specific question, but what are the kinds of sort of taxes or any changes, Baris, that Jay might be looking at there?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that question depends on whether Canada will apply any retaliatory tariffs onto U.S., right? So if there's no tariffs, I don't see any changes. But on the other hand, if we go ahead and then apply tariffs on automotives that come to Canada, then obviously there would be an impact. So there's no clarity around what kind of retaliation that we would do. I know that there's a conversation about retaliation for a while, and the first part has been implemented, the small part, I believe, and then there's a larger point coming up. But I personally, so looking at the data in 2024, we imported over 800,000 new vehicles from the U.S. And when we look at the Canadian market, in a good year, I'm just going to round it up. In a good year, in a normal year, we sell around 2 million new vehicles. So 800,000 over 2 million, that's what? That's 40%. That's quite a bit of cars. So personally, I don't think that we have the luxury to retaliate in automotive, because otherwise everything would become much more expensive for Canadians as well. And we've been criticizing for Donald Trump for doing that for his citizens. So I don't think it makes sense. But again, I'm slightly speculating here because I don't know what I don't know. I don't think that'll.
It is the question as to what's going to be the next step from the Canadian government. We have 2 minutes left. I have two callers I can't go to, Jay in Vancouver and Kassav in Surrey, but their questions are quite similar, and that is what's available and what would it take for more manufacturing, to build more of our auto supply chain here in Canada?
Yeah, so as I briefly mentioned, there's a lot of cars available, especially on the new side. So certain brands, they're still on the lower side compared to pre-COVID levels. But when you look at the market as an aggregate level, things are looking good. We, in fact, have more new vehicles than we did back in 2019. So there's availability there. So that's good. In terms of like being able to produce more cars, obviously, that's the ideal solution. But that said, it's not just like, you press a button and then suddenly you're manufacturing more cars. These, manufacturing plants are very complicated, sophisticated. There's a lot of technology. So it takes a while. And in fact, when I looked at it, it takes 18 to 36 months to build an automotive plant in North America.
Yeah.
And on average, 200,000 vehicles are being manufactured on an annual basis. So if we happen to say, you know what, we don't want any American cars, 800,000 that I mentioned, we will need to build at least
and that
four
will take time.
Exactly.
Baris,
Exactly.
thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks
Take
for
care.
having me.
Baris Akyurek with AutoTrader.